you and I both know that things don't always go the way we plan for them to go. Rarely do they go even the way we hope that they will go. And sometimes you stand back and you go, this just wasn't what I expected out of life. Maybe you say, this isn't what I expected out of myself in life. Or you might even say, this isn't what I expected out of God in life. And when you find yourself feeling that way, there's some words that we use to describe kind of how we're feeling. And maybe you've used some of these words. Maybe you'd say, I just feel very disillusioned by everything. It's not what I expected. Or you might say, I'm just devastated. Hasn't turned out the way I thought that it would. Or you might use the words let down. And it just feels like God has let me down. Somebody has let me down. It's not what I expected it to be. Or you might even say, you know what, I just feel like I'm driven to the brink of just utter frustration with what's going on around me. And when we find ourselves using these words, there's a question that every one of us ask, and it doesn't matter what our income level is, it doesn't matter how old we are, it doesn't matter what our background is, our education level, we all ask the same question, and the question we tend to ask is why? Why is this happening to me? Why am I experiencing this in my life? Now, sometimes we ask the question why, and it's really just more out of curiosity. Like for me, one of the questions I'm asking why about curiosity-wise right now is about the Jeopardy champion, James Holzhauer. Have you heard about him? In 17 episodes, he's won $1.3 million. And I look at that and I go, why him and not me? And when it comes to Jeopardy, there's only one thing that I can do when it comes to Jeopardy, and my family loves it when I do this. I can whistle the final Jeopardy song. I mean, I can do that. And they love it. They beg for me all the time. You probably want to hear me do that as well. And so I've got to close my eyes because otherwise I'm intimidated by all of you. But let me just whistle it for you. I don't know if I can do this or not. Let's try. It's not over yet. All right, that's it. Now, I know it's good, isn't it? That's all I can do when it comes to Jeopardy. And I think, how come James can win $1.3 million and all I can do is just barely whistle Final Jeopardy song? So sometimes we ask the question why, and it's really more out of curiosity. But other times we ask the question why, and it's because we know things aren't quite right in our lives. We know that things aren't happening the way we think that they should happen. We just say, you know what, things ought to be better in my life. And maybe you found yourself asking that question as well. And when we find ourselves frustrated with life, when we find ourselves feeling like it's not going the way that it should, we ask in frustration the question, why? If we use the letter U to kind of describe life, all of us want to be at the top of the letter U. We want our lives to be going well. We want everything to be going smoothly. And it's great when we're at the top, but most often we're not at the top. Because what happens is circumstances, thing comes into our lives and we begin to slide. And more often than not, we find ourselves at the bottom. And when we find ourselves at the bottom of the U, we're not just asking why out of curiosity, we're asking why out of frustration. And typically, we expand the question and we say, why God? Why are you doing this, God? Why have you abandoned me? Why are you letting this happen in my life? Do you know what's going on? Do you care what's going on in my life, God? Are you even interested at all? Do you even exist? We find ourselves asking. So maybe it comes in just kind of areas of just physical things. I mean, Ruth and I have had the opportunity to ask the question, why God, several times in our lives when it comes to just physical things. And so early in our marriage, it was infertility that we wrestled with. And then later it was cancer. And we're going, why, God? Why is this happening? And now we ask it when it comes to Ruth's mom and the whole issue of dementia. And I just go, this is what I really don't understand. God, why? Why would you allow Shirley to experience this? She doesn't know us. She doesn't know anything about her situation. Why would you allow this to go on? And so when it comes to physical areas, we ask the question, why, God? Or maybe for you, it's not in the physical realm. Maybe it's more in the relational realm. And so last week, if you were with us, you heard Paul and Elizabeth share their story. And in their story, they talked about their marriage, the relationship as it just broke apart. Started out strong. I mean, she said it. He was a guy like I never thought I would have the opportunity to meet, to marry, and yet things began to happen. Circumstances, events happened in their marriage, in their lives, and they began to slide, and they found themselves at rock bottom. And they're asking, why, God? Why have you allowed this to happen? And divorce papers have been filed. The only thing left is just sign the papers. And yet here's the cool thing about their story, and this is kind of a bonus for all of you that were here last week, and even if you're here this weekend, to be able to go online and hear the rest of their story, because the rest of their story is amazing. They were on the brink of divorce, ready to sign the papers, but they didn't sign the papers, and all of a sudden God begins to work, and he'd been working all along, but he began to take effect in their lives, and Paul begins to change, and Elizabeth begins to change. Jesus is working in their lives and changing their lives, and they talk and say, maybe we ought to work on this, and over time they do, and finally they're reconcile and their marriage is back together, and for the last several years they've been together. And if you talk to them now, they would say, you know what, our marriage is stronger now than it ever was before. And so they're just excited about their story. And so here's the bonus. You can go online, you can hear the entire story, kind of their struggles, but also how God has worked in their life and brought them back together. And so just go online and check that out. Worth listening and hearing their particular story and how God has worked with them. But my question to you is, where are you? Where are you on the U? I mean, you could be here, you could be here. My guess is that you're sliding somewhere. My guess is maybe you're at rock bottom right now, and you find yourself asking the question, why? God, why have you abandoned me? What are you doing in my life? And if I could tell you the question that I'm asked more often as a pastor than any other question is when somebody sits down with me, or they'll catch me in the hall, and they'll say, look, this is what's going on in my life. And they'll say, why, David? Why is this happening? Why is God allowing this to happen in my life? And my response, I don't have a clue. I don't know. Because what God's doing in your life may be totally different than what he's doing in my life, and it may turn out totally different than what he's doing in my life or somebody else's life. But what I do know is God is working, and he's doing something in our lives. And so I want us to go to school today on a story that is straight out of history but recorded for us in the Bible, a story that just kind of helps us figure out, okay, what might God be doing in our lives when we find ourselves at the bottom, when we find ourselves at the top? Is God even there? Does he care? And so grab a Bible if you would. And let me tell you, if you don't typically grab one today, I need you to grab one because we're going to do a lot of reading. There should be some of the seats there around you, so grab one, open up your phone, the Bible app if you want to do that. Esther chapter 1, page 384. Esther chapter 1, page 384. And I want us to kind of go to school on three individuals who lived about 2,500 years ago, and their story is recorded in history. It's recorded in this book of Esther in the Bible, and it's a place where we can kind of learn what God might be doing from history in our lives today. And if you're at home watching online, I'd encourage you to pause, grab a Bible as well, and read along, because we're going to do a good bit of reading right out of the story of what God may be doing. I'm going to begin chapter 1, verse 1. It says, these events, sets up the story for us, these events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. Now, I'll just stop there to say the reason why that's there is just to kind of set the place and say, you know what, this is a true story. It's a real story. And you can go back in history. You can read about Xerxes. It truly did happen. So simply stated, it's real. Xerxes was the king of the Persian Empire, and it was an empire that stretched from Ethiopia to India, and he was powerful, so powerful that some people would actually refer to him as the King of Kings. That's how powerful he was. He was born into royalty, but he had big shoes to fill because his father, his grandfather were known as being the most just, the most fair kings that had ever ruled up until that time, and unfortunately, Xerxes did not follow in their path, and so he was ruthless and had incredible power and incredible wealth, but he was a ruthless king as well. Jump down to verse 3. It says, in the third year of Xerxes' reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. He invited all of the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as all the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days, a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. In other words, he's kind of taken 180 days to show off to all of his military officers, all of his officials, and this party just kind of goes on and on and on. Now, this party actually occurs in history. If you follow history, if you read about the Greeks and the Spartans, and if you've seen the movie 300 or you know the story of the 300 Spartans, Xerxes is the king that they're fighting against. It's when Xerxes is actually invading Greece that they are coming into play. This is several years, just a few years before that particular battle. And this banquet is going on, and it's lasting 6 months, but it's not done. After 6 months, Xerxes throws another party. The first one was for all of his military officials. This one is for everybody else, and it lasts a week. All the other men are invited to this party. His queen Vashti, she invites all of the women. Look at verse 5. When it was over, meaning the 180-day banquet, the king gave a banquet for all of the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. Jump down to verse 7. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine, reflecting the king's generosity. Such a good guy. By the edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all of his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. In other words, open bar. In other words, the wine is flowing freely, and so what goes along with that is that more than likely their thinking was impaired, and so when King Xerxes comes up with an idea, a plan, he may not be thinking wisely, he may not have all of his senses with him when he comes up with an idea, a plan. Verse 10 says, on the 7th day of the feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits because of the wine, he's drunk. He's in high spirits because of the wine. He told 7 eunuchs who attend him, bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. Here's Xerxes, and he's drunk, and he's got all of these other drunk men in the palace with him, and he comes up with what he thinks is a brilliant idea. Let's bring Vashti out here. Let's show her off. Let's show off how beautiful she is to all of these drunken men in the palace. And her response, verse 12, but when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. And what you need to realize is when you're the king of kings, you can have whatever you want whenever you want it. He's not used to being told no, and so Vashti's response leaves him furious. And as we get further into the story, what we begin to find out about Xerxes is he had an anger problem. He had anger issues. And so Xerxes, he's angry. He decides to talk to his other counselors, his wise advisors, who also happen to be drunk at the same time, as to what they ought to do about Queen Vashti. How do they respond to a queen that does not do what the king wants her to do? And as they talk, they realize, you know what, this is actually a bigger problem than just one woman. This may be a problem for all the women in the kingdom. So here's their plan, verse 16. Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire, they tell Xerxes. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, wives of all of the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. And they're just saying, we've got to take drastic measures here. Because of what she's done, every wife is going to stand up and revolt. She's not going to respect her husband. There's going to be marital discord. And I mean, who wants that? And so again, these drunken advisors come up with a plan that they think is an amazing plan. And here it is, verse 19. So, if it pleased the king, and it did, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medes that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the king's presence, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. Oh, this ought to do it. This is going to make all the women say, yes, I'll follow you. Verse 21, the king and his nobles thought this made good sense, which shows the condition they were in at that time. So he follows the counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in his own script and language, proclaiming every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. They're thinking well in this plan, and so they spread the information out through an ancient kind of Pony Express system. And so let's pause for just a minute with the story. Let me just kind of say, let's kind of take a snapshot of what the situation is that Xerxes finds himself in. And so there's arrogance. He throws a 180-day party just to say, this is how wealthy I am. This is how powerful I am. There's indulgence. They spend 180 days just partying, a banquet, eating, drinking, and their partying is going on on, there is wine at the party. There's more wine at the party. There's more wine at the party, which leads to drunkenness, which then leads to, and maybe it didn't lead to it, but there was definitely sexism here. Let's bring Vashti and let's show her off, and then let's make sure we put all our wives in the proper place. There's anger going on Xerxes' place or part, and then beyond that, there's just fools and foolish advisors giving bad advice in that situation. And this is kind of the circumstances that we've got so far. Less than ideal, but the circumstances nonetheless. Now, over time, Xerxes realizes he made a mistake. He realizes this wasn't such a good decision. He's lonely, he's depressed, and so he goes back to his same advisors, which again is a bad decision. Why would you do that? He goes back to the same advisors to say, what are we going to be able to do about this? And so chapter 2, verse 1. After Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what he had done and the decree that he had made. In other words, he's lonely, he's depressed, he wants something to change. And so jump down to verse 4. After that, or actually, let's go verse 2. So his personal attendant suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Verse 4, after that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. The plan they come up with, let's just replace Vashti altogether. Let's find another queen. Let's have a beauty pageant. And let's go out through the entire empire, and let's bring in the most beautiful women. The king can decide who it is that he wants to be his wife. Now, at that time, we're told in verse 5, the second character of our story comes into play. Verse 5. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. Verse 7. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. Apparently, her parents died when she was young. Mordecai adopts her as his own, and because of her beauty, as they go out and have this beauty pageant, bring in all the beautiful women from the empire, she's brought in to take part in this beauty pageant for the king. Verse 8. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, were brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. And what happens is, for the next 12 months, all of these women are prepared. And they're prepared for one thing. They're prepared for one night with the king. And so we see verse 12, before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatment, 6 months of oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from her harem. That evening, she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to the second harem where the king's wives lived. Jump down a couple of lines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. Now let's just pause for a moment and think about what's really going on here. These women weren't just simply trying to win over his affections in this beauty pageant. These women were not spending the night with the king playing card games. These women were being prepared and groomed for a sexual relationship with the king, and after that one night with the king, what happened to most of the women, unless he just especially enjoyed them and wanted them back, is they would be put into a harem never to see the king again. And then it's Esther's turn, verse 16. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter on the 7th year of his reign, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasion, he gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all of his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving generous gifts to everyone. And you've got this beauty pageant going on, and Esther wins, and I don't know if it's a win she was looking for because she was forced into this situation, but let's just pause and let's take another snapshot of what's actually going on in Esther's surroundings. And so here's what we've got in her life. We've got death. She lost both of her parents when she was young. We've got beauty. The Bible calls her beautiful of form and face. She was a beautiful woman. We've got disregard for what God actually wanted Mordecai and Esther to be doing. They weren't even supposed to be in Susa right now. If you look back at history, they had been told by God with all of the Jewish people to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. They weren't even supposed to be there. And so they totally disregarded what God had asked them to do. But they're there in this situation anyway. Hormones are happening all over the place for the king and all of his advisors. There's sex, there's still more sex on top of that, and violations. Violations of the women that are a part of this, where they weren't asking to be a part of this, and Esther didn't ask to be a part of this, and violations of what God would say is appropriate, because Esther was not, according to God, even to have sexual relations with a man unless she was married to him, and Esther would not have ever married Xerxes had she had the choice, because he wasn't a follower of God, and so she was violating. There were violations of what God says is appropriate, and then just lots and lots of partying going on, and so this is the circumstance that Esther finds herself in. And you go, okay, it's less than ideal. Now, there's one other character that comes into that we just need to really read a little bit more about. One more piece of the story that we can't leave out today. And as we read it, you're going to say, what does this have to do with anything? And it almost feels like a footnote in the story, but it becomes a huge part of the story later on. Verse 21, chapter 2, one day, as Mordecai, again, remember, Mordecai is Esther's uncle, was on duty at the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, who were guards at the door of the king's private quarters, became angry at King Xerxes and plotted to assassinate him. But Mordecai heard about the plot and gave the information to Queen Esther. She then told the king about it and gave Mordecai credit for the report. When an investigation was made and Mordecai's story was found to be true, the two men were impaled on a sharpened pole. This was all recorded in the book of history of King Xerxes' reign. In other words, the king is saved by Mordecai. The events are documented. They're recorded in the history books of the Persian Empire. And let me just stop and take a snapshot of what Mordecai is finding his situation to be. And for him, there's anger, because there's people that don't like Xerxes. They want to kill him. They want to assassinate him. There's deceit, in that behind the scenes they're working to somehow come up with this assassination plot. Murder is what they want, and what they end up receiving is impalement on a sharpened pole, and gives you a sense of who Xerxes is or what he was like. And you take all of these different circumstances that Xerxes was facing, Mordecai was facing, Esther was facing, and this is what you get. This is a situation that they find themselves in. Arrogance, indulgence, partying, drunkenness, sexism, anger, fools giving bad advice, death, beauty, disregard, hormones, sex, violations, more partying, secrets, deceit, murder, impalement, and salvation for Xerxes, because he isn't actually killed. And you look at all this and you go, oh my goodness, this looks like a modern TV show that we would watch today. And you go, how in the world could God possibly work in this kind of environment? Is God even there in this kind of environment? I mean, it doesn't seem like God would want to be anywhere near this kind of place, so where would God be? I can't imagine God being there. Why did he allow it to get to this situation? And I would just ask you for a moment, what does your life look like? And are any of these elements involved in your life? And you stand back and you go, I don't know if God's involved. I don't know if God could possibly work in my environment. And yet I stand back and go, if he could look and work in this environment, I think he could work in yours as well. And it may seem to you, as you look at this, that God is non-existent for them and for you. But here's what you need to know. God is working. And he's working in a less than ideal environment. What we're going to find in the story is God is incredibly active in all of this, and it's a less than ideal environment. In your situation, you may say, there's no way that God can be involved in my life, and it doesn't seem like he knows what's happening in your life. But you need to know, in your situation today, God is there, and he's working, and he's active in that situation. And so to describe how God is involved in those kind of situations, there's a concept that kind of describes God working in those environments. It's called the providence of God. The providence of God is simply this. It's just God setting things up so that what he wants to happen will actually happen. It's God taking the chaos of our lives in situations like we just described, and he's doing what he wants to make what he wants happen. And the providence of God is mixing all of those events up and saying, okay, something amazing is going to come out of this. And for our lives, it's when we find ourselves sliding, and there's events in our lives that we look at, and when we look at them, we think, oh, this is awful. We think this is terrible. The providence of God says he takes each and every one of those events, he mixes them together, and he says it's going to come out on the other end being something you can't even begin to imagine. Our focus tends to be on the individual events, but God's focus is on the big picture. God's focus is on what's going on bigger around him. See, his vantage point, to him it all makes sense because he can see the whole thing. But we just see one event after another, and we think, oh, there's no way. There's no way that God's involved. There's no way that God's a part of this. And so we look at these events, and we go, I'm just having some bad luck right now. We look at these events and think there's just random events that are going on. That's just chance. It just happened. But you need to understand, for God, there is no such thing as random events. There is no such thing as chance. There is no such thing as just luck. God is working. He's taking all of these events in our lives, and he's mixing them together. And what's challenging, I think, about the providence of God is that God doesn't tell us the whole plan. I mean, we could almost accept the fact that God's got a plan, that he's working. We could accept that if he would show us the whole plan. I don't know about you, but I like to know the plan. Tell me the plan. That's one of my mantras. Just tell me the plan. As long as I know where we're going, I'm fine. But God doesn't do that. God just says, you know what? Follow me each step of the way, and I'll get you there. But we get frustrated. And so what happens when it comes to the providence of God, we get frustrated. And see, God's in control, but his method is being in control, and it often involves twists, turns, meanderings, and all of a sudden we get real concerned. And we go, oh, God, I don't know that you know what you're doing. I'm not sure what's happening here in the midst of my life. And so we find ourselves, and see, the problem is, for all of us, we prefer autonomy over providence. In other words, we want to be in control. When we find ourselves sliding, we go, God, you know what? I think I can do better here. And so what happens to us, the danger is, as we're sliding down and just experiencing all of these different things in our lives, we want to take control because we start thinking, oh, God, I know better what needs to happen in my life. Obviously, because of the events that you've allowed in my life, I don't think you know what's going on. God, I don't think you care about me. I think I'll just take control of my life, and I think I'll be the one that can do a better job kind of pulling this all together. And yet the reality of all of this is that even though we're sliding down, even though we feel like we can do a better job, God is in control. God is in control, and he's doing his thing, and he's working in our lives, and we think we know better, but we don't. I like what Lisa Turkhurst actually says about our wanting control. This is what she says. She's an author. She says, we don't just want to read about the end of our story and feel good about it. In other words, we don't want to just kind of hear that, oh, someday this is going to turn out well. Instead, she says, we want to take the pen. We want to write the ending ourselves. We feel very certain about how things should turn out. We say, God, I'm going to take control. I'm going to write the ending of this story, and I'll just kind of figure all of this out for myself. And yet, the truth is, it doesn't matter how things appear right now. God is in control, whether you realize it or not. And whether you believe in the providence of God or not, it doesn't really matter. God is there, and he's working, and it doesn't change the fact that the providence of God is true. And now what we're going to find out about the story of Xerxes and Esther and Mordecai is that God had them positioned exactly where he wanted them in life. And you remember the list of what it was like, and you go, how in the world could God want them in that environment? He had them exactly where he wanted them to be. And can I tell you, wherever you are in your life right now, God has you positioned exactly where he wants you to be today, right now. Doesn't mean it's where you're going to end up. Doesn't mean it's where he wants you to end up, but he's got you positioned where he wants you today in your life as well. And so my question is, where are you? Where are you in the U? Are you sliding? My guess is most of us are sliding. Some of us may be at rock bottom. And where's Esther in the U? And does God know? Does he care about you? And see, where you are right now is where God wants you to be, so he can cause to happen what he wants to happen in your life. And it may not make sense to you right now. It may not even feel good to you. You may be in that situation because of some bad decisions you've made. You may be in that position because other people have made bad decisions and it's impacted you. But God knows where he's taking you. He knows the path. And so what he says to you and me is, don't give up. He says, keep following me. Focus on Jesus and keep following me. And or some of us, it may be start following me. Is what he's saying to us. And so right now, if you find yourself at the bottom of the U, you go, so what am I supposed to do? If God's got me there for a reason, how am I supposed to get through this? And so I like a lot what Lisa Turkhurst says about just kind of figuring out. She says there's some things that we don't have to do, and there's some things that we do have to do. And so let me just tell you what she says. What we don't have to do is know the plan, to trust that there is a plan. You don't have to know exactly what God's going to do each step of the way to trust that he does have a plan. And he does. He's got a plan. She also says you don't have to feel good to trust that there's a good plan coming. In other words, you don't have to feel good at the bottom because somehow you know it's going to be good at the end. You could feel terrible right now, but it still means that God has a plan and he's working, and good will come. She also says what you don't have to do is see evidence of changes to trust that it's not always going to be this hard. In other words, when you're at the bottom, you may not see anything positive happening in your life right now. That doesn't mean that God isn't still working. You don't have to see evidence to know that he's actually working your plan. So here's what she says we ought to do. Here are the things that she says. Close our eyes, turn our thoughts to Jesus. God's plan in all of this is through his son, Jesus, and so we begin to turn our eyes to Jesus, but not only turn our eyes on Jesus, but actually fix our thoughts on him. And see, our tendency as we're sliding is to look at each individual event and how awful that event is. And what can I do to get out of that event? When we find ourselves at rock bottom, our tendency is to just look at all the things that are happening around us. And the suggestion is, rather than focus on the things around us, fix our eyes and our thoughts on Jesus. And if it helps, her recommendation is, say his name over and over and over. Just step back in the midst of whatever circumstance you're in and just say, oh, Jesus, I'm just trusting you and you alone to get me to where God wants me to be. And it's a simple plan. It's trusting God, and we'd love to figure out how to fix things ourselves. And yet when we find ourselves in this space in between, and we're just asking ourselves, God, where are you? God says, I'm there. And I will never, ever leave you. And so it's in those moments we have to step back and lean into what God has told us by talking to other people as well. And so I want to read some passages, some verses to you, things that God said to others. About 3,000 years ago, a group of people that were struggling like you might be struggling, finding themselves at the bottom of the U. And this is what God said to them, and I think it's what he says to you and to me as well. Book of Isaiah, he says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I've called you by name. You are mine. When you go through the deep waters, I will be with you. We sang about this already earlier today. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. There's another in the fire. There's another in the water with you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. He says, I will be with you. Another time, Isaiah as well. God says, I will be your God throughout your lifetime. And I like this, until your hair is white with age. I made you and I will care for you. I will carry you along and I will save you. You know what hit me yesterday in one of our gatherings, actually reading this, is I kind of step back and I look at my mother-in-law, Shirley, and I say, God, what are you doing? This whole thing of dementia, I don't get it. And yet it hit me as I'm standing here reading this. God says, you know what, Shirley? Until your hair is white with age, in spite of what you're going through, I'm with you. I will not leave you. I will walk with you. I will care for you. And I step back and I go, okay, God, I don't know what you're doing in Shirley's life, but I'm going to trust you that you're caring for her and you're doing what you want to do to make what happen, what you want to happen. And another place, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Do not panic before them being the battles that you face, them being the circumstances that we find ourselves in. He says, don't panic. Don't be afraid as you're in the midst of those things. Why not? Because the Lord your God is personally going to go ahead of you. He's not just with us, he's leading us. He's going ahead of us. So don't panic. He will neither fail you or abandon you. And you find yourself sliding right now, and you find yourself at rock bottom, and you go, God, I don't know what's going on here. Say, don't panic. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. I'm actually moving ahead of you. One other passage. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. He says, I'm with you. And you may be sliding and you may be at rock bottom, but I'm with you every single step of the way. So I'll tell you how we want to close today. It's really just focusing in on the fact that God is with us, that he will always be with us. And I want to give us the opportunity just to kind of pause and just talk to God for a few moments. Say, okay, God, I wish I was here. Definitely wish I was here, but for whatever reason, you've got me sliding, it feels like right now. And in the midst of that, I don't want to panic. I don't want to be afraid. I want to follow you, God. And so I just want to focus on Jesus. Keep my eyes on Jesus every step of the way because he's leading, he's guiding me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment and through songs is this powerful thing, music and song, where it gives us an opportunity to talk to God and say things to God that maybe we wouldn't know how to say ourselves, but because somebody else has put songs and words into songs, we go, oh, that's exactly how I feel. And so Matt Goss is going to sing for us. And some of you across all our locations may not know Matt. Matt's been our worship leader for almost 20 years, our worship pastor here at LCBC for almost 20 years, and just an amazing musician, amazing leader, and he leads kind of all of our worship and all of our campuses. And so Matt's going to sing. And as he sings, here's my invitation to you. Let him say the words that you don't know how to say. Let him express some of the feelings that you're not sure how to express to God. And as he sings and as he expresses those thoughts, say to God, that's me. God, I want to follow you. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to panic. God, I'm choosing to follow you. So take this moment. Allow Matt to speak in your behalf, but say, God, this is me. I want to choose to follow you.
Been good at change. If I'm honest, it's always scared me. But I can't deny the stirring deep inside me. I know it's time to stop resisting. 'Cause I'm not getting any younger. Fear's such a sad way to live a life. So face to the wind, I'm jumping out, I'm walking in every single thing you want to show me. To the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the taking in and letting go, to tears and laughter, the great unknown, to the open journey, into faith I go, into faith I go. Nobody said this would be easy. Anyone who did never went through anything painful. But faith is not some fragile thing that shatters when we walk through something hard. So we walk on, whatever may come. To the ups and downs, the highs and lows, to taking in and letting go, to the open journey, the great unknown, the tears and laughter, into faith I go, running like a child through an open field. Stepping to the edge, I'm facing all my fears. If this is what it feels like to be born again, I'll be born again. So when I feel like giving up, when I feel like throwing it all away, I look back over my shoulder, I can see your goodness every step that I have taken. Oh, and it beats like a drum, and it rings like a bell. Oh, and it sings like a choir, and it's leading me on my way. Oh, you lead me on my way to the ups and downs, the highs and lows, to the taking in and the letting go, to tears and laughter, the great unknown, to the open journey, into faith I go, into faith I go, into faith I go.
Into faith we go. Said, okay, God, I'm going to follow Jesus through the tears, through the laughter. And he doesn't say it's going to be easy. He never tells us it's going to be easy. Your marriage may not be easy. Your kids may not be easy. Your work may not be easy. Your health may not be easy. It's not about being easy. It's all about God and his providence taking whatever you're experiencing, the good, the bad, all of it. He's mixing that together into something amazing. And it may look totally different than anything you would expect now. But he says, I'm going to make something new. And again, he's not fixing you. He's not fixing your problems. He's not just trying to put patches on you. But he says, I'm going to recreate you into something brand new. And do something amazing with your life. So this week, my hope is in the midst of your circumstances that you've been questioning, could God even be present? How could God work in these circumstances? He can. We're going to find that out with Xerxes, with Esther, with Mordecai. God could do amazing things, even in the roughest, less than ideal circumstances, because he's working his plan and he's doing what he wants to do, and he's doing that in your life as well. So my challenge to you, my encouragement to you this week, follow Jesus. If you need to, just say his name again and again and again. Every weekend after every gathering, if you would want somebody to pray with you, just talk with, about whatever you may be experiencing, the highs, the lows, whatever it may be, then every location, to my right, to your left, front corner of the auditoriums, people would love to pray with you. I hope you'll take advantage of that. But this week, man, into faith, go. Follow Jesus. Fix your eyes on him. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.